Good morning. On behalf of the Wisconsin Association of Charitable Gift Planners and Madison Community Foundation, I welcome you to our panel discussion, Philanthropy in the African-American Community. My name is David Kaler, and I have the privilege of serving each of these organizations as a staff member for the Community Foundation and as a board member for the Wisconsin Association of Charitable Gift Planners. We are also known as WACGP, which I realize somehow seems longer than our actual name, but that's how I'm going to refer to us. Many of you in the audience today are representatives from nonprofit organizations, and a number are professional advisors. Our group has a great deal in common. We build relationships and we help people meet goals to make a meaningful difference in our world. It's an honor to have all of you here today. Before we begin our discussion, I need to invite your patience while we conduct what will be an historically brief annual member meeting for WACGP. I'm going to offer barest due diligence here. So for those of you who do not know us, WACGP is a local chapter of a national organization, and we provide professional development, educational, and networking opportunities for individuals who work in gift planning. That includes development professionals, attorneys, CPAs, financial and philanthropic advisors. So I will call our meeting to order and ask WACGP members to use the Zoom chat feature to type responses as we entertain several motions. And if you bear with me, I need to get my chat so I can see it better. Okay. So, please type 1 to so move and type 2 to second a motion. Just put a Y in there if you're in favor and an N if you're opposed. So if there are any questions, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom. So first, I'd like to ask for a motion and a second to approve our minutes from last year's meeting. Dave Mosner has the move. Do I have a second? Jennifer Mcfarland seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please type Y. Opposed? N? The minutes are approved. That worked. Thank you. They're way approved. Lots of yeses. I'll combine our presidents, treasurers, and membership reports into one. It's been a pretty quiet year due to COVID. We canceled 1 of 4 programs. Our networking social, but our finances remain solid thanks to our stable membership, including many of you here. Our final program of the year is scheduled for 12/8, and that is working with women on estate and charitable gift planning. So please join us and stay tuned for more relevant programs in 2021. The most important order of business that we have this morning for this annual meeting is the election of 2 new board members. Noelle Ogelli is Associate Attorney with Wilson Law Group, where she practices estate planning and brings a background in finance, tax preparation, trust administration, business formation, and succession. And Colin Nemeth is Associate Vice President and Managing Director of Development, Gift Planning, and Real Estate at the Wisconsin Foundation and Alumni Association, where he brings expertise in complex charitable giving strategies, including life income and gifts of real estate. I should note, both are super nice and Badger alums. May I have a motion, 1, and a second, 2, to approve the election of the nominees, Noelle and Colin, to our board of directors. Ron Berman gets the motion. May I have a second? Creel Ziering, the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please type Y. Opposed? And the ayes have it. We're thrilled to bring these 2 on board. We would also like to approve our proposed slate of officers for next year, and that includes Bruce Hutler with Baker Tilly as our new vice president, Bridget Frazier with Wisconsin Youth Symphony Orchestra, continuing as secretary, Adam Mand with US Bank, continuing as treasurer, and I, David Kaler, with Madison Community Foundation, and I hope to continue as president. May I have a motion, 1, and a second, two, to approve the election of our officers. Pete Covey has the motion. May I have a second? Mike Switzer, second. Excellent. All in favor, please vote Y. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Before we adjourn this annual meeting, I'd like to recognize Jennifer Mcfarland, the foundation, who's with the Wisconsin Foundation and Alumni Association, who has completed her term with WACGP as a board member. During her tenure, she served as president and vice president, and she led us through strategic planning, among other things. Just want to reflect in the minutes our thanks to Jennifer for your service and leadership. So I need to check the Q&A, and seeing no questions there, I declare this meeting adjourned. If there is good to come from the many challenges of 2020, it certainly includes the rising collective voice that demands racial and social justice and equity for Black and Brown Americans. This discussion, Philanthropy in the African-American Community, was requested by you, our members, because you know its significance, you value listening and learning from those around you. We have an impressive group assembled to lead us, and that's thanks in large part to the skill of our moderator, Angela Davis. Angela, if you would join us. Angela serves as Director of Development for Madison Community Foundation, where she brings deep experience in nonprofit and philanthropic advising. She's a proud Delta and was named by Madison 365 among our most influential Black leaders. It is a privilege to introduce my colleague, friend, and impact player for our community, Angela Davis.
Thank you very much, David.
Well, thank you, Angela. You ready to do this?
Let's do it. First of all, that was the best meeting I've attended in a long time. Thank you very much. I wish all my meetings were that swiftly and well run, very smooth. But thank you for the kind introduction. So I better bring it with all that.
I better sign off while I'm ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Before we begin, I want to let you know that we will be providing links to reports, studies, articles, even a podcast that you can access later for a deeper dive into our topic. During this session, we will discuss practices, perceptions, experiences of the African-American community as it relates to philanthropy. And as David said, this is the time to have this discussion. According to the W.K. Kellogg Foundation Cultures of Giving report, nearly 2/3 of African-American households donate to organizations and causes to the tune of $11 billion each year. That's right, $11 billion. Donors, individual or corporate, transcends color and is built on meaningful, long-term relationships that's based on mutual respect, affinity, and shared interests. We appreciate your willingness to explore this timely topic more now than ever in this time in history, when we need to have open and candid conversations with one another. And this will be a very open and a very candid conversation. At this time, I want to acknowledge and thank our esteemed panelists for immediately agreeing to be part of this discussion. I did not have to ask any of them twice to take part in this discussion. We have gathered wealth advisors, donors, corporate partners, and one of our area's major local nonprofit fundraisers. I now invite each of our panelists to turn on their video and unmute themselves and introduce themselves to our audience and tell us a little bit about your background and what this topic, philanthropy in the African-American community, means to you. And I'll start with Laura Ford Harris.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning to my fellow panelists. Thank you all so much for inviting me here. Again, my name is Laura Ford Harris. I'm the Chief Development Officer for the Boys and Girls Club of Dane County. I am new to Madison. I've been here just a little over a year, coming from Cincinnati, Ohio, where I work for the United Way, Girl Scouts of Western Ohio. And so I've had a over 30-year career in development and nonprofit. What makes this topic so important to me is at some point in time in my career, I decided that giving and helping people to give and to help others in need was so important. It's so critical in this community, and it's actually a bedrock of the African-American community and traditions. And so finding a job that matches both your passion and things that you care about in the community, it's a wonderful opportunity. So that's why I am involved in this topic. So thank you so much for introducing myself and for being here this morning.
Thank you, Laura. And now we'll turn it over to Alex.
Good morning and happy Tuesday. Again, I want to echo what Laura said. It is a privilege for me to be joining this panel and to be also in a meeting, a pre-meeting that went by so quickly. So I give my snaps and my props off to David and Ange. Thank you so much for pulling us all together. This is a most timely and most important topic of conversation. For me, I have to begin by saying that it is impossible for me to imagine a world without community. And that means that I have a really hard time when I think about the work that I am doing at CUNA Mutual Group, which is to create a just and equitable community. And that requires us centering Blackness. It requires us talking about the commitments that we have made for generations. And it is important that we stand, or right now we're all sitting, and joining together in talking about this. I did mention that I am over at CUNA Mutual Group. I am part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion team. I oversee our CUNA Mutual Group Foundation, our community giving, and also, as I like to call it, our employee workforce engagement. So when you think volunteerism, when you think about board leadership, when you think about advocacy, that is all part of the work that I do. And for me personally, my history is rooted in equity and justice. I often share a story of the very first time I remember volunteering and the very first time I ever visited a state capitol. And I was about 2-3 years old. And I went up and I introduced myself to the governor of Michigan at the time and said, "Hi, I'm Alexzandra Shade and I'm Bill Shade's daughter. And you have the privilege of working for my father as he works to fight for those marginalized groups and communities." I didn't say it like that. Obviously, I said it more like a 2 or 3-year-old. But for me, this has been my guiding light. It is working with people. It is working to empower together. And it's working to affect change in a system that so much needs it. Thanks for having me tonight.
Thank you very much, Alex. And now we'll turn it over to Bob.
Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here today. And I want to just quickly thank Angela Davis for putting this session together. It is very important, as Alex has said, and I've oftentimes just sent out informal comments relating to this topic, oftentimes to my colleagues in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, although I live in Madison, and don't always get responses to the so-called missives. However, Angela has been most responsive, and I think some of the conversations we had helped to lead to activities such as this. So I do thank the Madison Community Foundation. I have oftentimes described myself as the poorest philanthropist in the United States of America. Like many others, I've been a volunteer at my church, I've worked in community groups, and have often just done a lot of things around the communities wherever I've lived without much thinking about it as being a philanthropic act. However, I did get into a more formalized role once my father passed away in 1982, because he was a well-known sort of unsung hero in Greensboro, North Carolina, advocating for community and for education. We thought it was important to memorialize his memory, and we started a student scholarship fund in his honor. And of course, that put us onto the treadmill of raising money to give out the scholarships. And we started a golf tournament that actually turned out to be a real gathering place for people in the community to help raise funds for these young students that we wanted to support as they went on to pursue their higher education from the Greensboro, North Carolina area. Once my mother passed away about 12 years later, we continued the golf outing for several years after that, but then decided it was going to be too labor intensive to keep it going, and there wasn't much of a succession in place. So we ended up talking with the Greater Greensboro Foundation, which I don't know if it was too old at that time in the early 90s. And we discovered this idea of a donor advised fund. And we endowed it so that we could continue to give out those scholarships without having to do as much of the fundraising work ourselves over time. So that's been one of my experiences as far as being on the donor side. I do sit on the board of directors of American Players Theater, and I just want to mention that I have learned a great deal being on that board, because as you can imagine, especially in the time of the pandemic, the whole fundraising arm has been highly active and creative. And I've just learned a lot from how they do the fundraising, as well as even some of the endowment planning that they're doing these days. With that, I'll indicate that I actually have more experience on what I call the beneficiary side, having been a prolific creator of nonprofit organizations, a couple of them in Milwaukee that are still thriving today. Well, one of them is Urban Economic Development Association. And I started a Black think tank called the Halifax Institute, and it was very active, and there are some outcomes that are still thriving today, even though the Institute itself has gone somewhat dormant. And then many people know me more from the Asset Builders of America, which I started in 1999 and is focused on financial education for young people. Just a couple of quick things regarding what philanthropy means to me. One is, having worked in state government for 25 years, I came to the conclusion that government really can't solve some of the problems that need to be solved in communities. And that's when I stepped away and got more into the private sector, and feel strongly that it's going to be much more up to the private sector, especially as now we're into $25 trillion of federal government debt, that we understand how we can deploy our best selves and our resources efficiently to really solve some of these problems and not rely as much on government. The other thing that I observed when I did step away and entered into the nonprofit world, I believe there's a little bit of a tail wagging the dog. A lot of the people who sit on some of the higher level boards that are doling out funds, they do tend to be middle class to upper middle class. And oftentimes they really fervently want to help individuals that are much more impoverished. And there just seems to be a gap, because I've seen sometimes the mission statements and the donor thrust be developed almost out, for lack of a better word, in a dictatorial sense, where there's a lot of constraints as far as how someone has to respond to the RFP, and yet people on the ground are oftentimes doing very good work and don't always have their work fit into the parameters that the funders are oftentimes looking for. There are a few other things that I'll probably say as we go along. I'll stop right there, but I do believe that philanthropy has an opportunity to really be more in the lead than it even has been before, as we rely on the private sector. And it actually is the perfect mashup between private sector and nonprofit. So I appreciate this leadership event that Angela has put together today. And I hope that our discussion informs the practice as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Bob. You are deep, and this is going to be good. I already know. And saving the best for last, Martinez, would you please introduce yourself and let us know what this topic means to you?
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. First, I would love to thank Angela Davis for establishing today as a day that we can all congregate, get together, and create a new vision for ourselves. And I think that it's important for us to connect with each other and to build from the ground up, to build a new monument of success. And that's why I'm in this space. My name is Martinez White. I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I tell a little bit of my story. I was raised by a single mom of 6 children, my 4 brothers and my sister, myself. And I got a chance to come to the University of Wisconsin-Madison as a 16-year-old college admit. And that would not have been possible if it weren't for philanthropy. I would have not have been able to come to the flagship campus in my state and have the career that I have and the trajectory that I have for myself and my 4-year-old boy and my entire family as a first-generation college student, had it not been for gifts. So I'm a recipient of giving, and it's manifested so many things in my life. That's why I'm here. I believe that we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, right? All of those good things. I believe in a more perfect union. I believe that we can push the culture forward and we can always do better. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm rooted in this space, because there's probably 20,000 more Martinez Whites in this state that I haven't met yet. So I'm here on their behalf. And I just want us to realize that the work that we do, the end goal is really to save lives and establish intergenerational wealth and legacy. So that's what I'm here to do, is to talk about how we can continue to do that, how we can continue to diversify our giving just as much as we diversify our portfolios. And we expect, rates of returns and maximize returns. That's the same philosophy that I believe in when we're talking about giving back to others, is diversification of giving. So that's why I'm here. I'm excited. My mantra is that dreams are made to be achieved. And this is a dream of mine to be on this call. And I thank you guys for welcoming me, and I'm ready to talk. Let's get to it.
Thank you so much to our panel. And before we start, I want to let our audience know that this session is being recorded, and it will be made available on Madison Community Foundation's YouTube channel later, and on WACGP. The link will be available as well, because we know that you will have colleagues that you will want to view this later, or you may want to watch it again yourself. With that, I'm going to start with Laura. Laura, philanthropy in the African-American community is not a new concept. According to data for 2016 from the U.S. Trust, Bank of America, and Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy study in 2016, found that African-American households tend to give more of their discretionary income, as much as 25% more, to charitable causes than white Americans. Mm-hmm. And that figure increases as African-Americans move into the ranks of the wealthy. And this is something that is not talked about. Mm-hmm. Many scholars have preferred to emphasize white philanthropic efforts on behalf of the Black community, mm-hmm. and tended to ignore Black donors' contributions to Black organizations. Mm-hmm. Laura, how has the Black community in some instances been excluded or discounted from the narrative of philanthropy? And can you talk about the history a little bit? Can you set the table for us for this discussion?
Absolutely. Thank you, Angela, for that question. I'm going to cite information today from the Stanford Social Innovation Review. It's the African-American Philanthropy, A Culture of Generosity. It's a podcast that you can actually listen to that featured Tyrone Friedman, Stacia Washington, and Michael Voss. It's from August 12th of 2020. And so let's just start with African-American philanthropy. And it goes back to traditions of giving, caring, and sharing that were actually a part of West African culture before colonialism, okay? When we talk about family and communal structures, when people were slaves and if they survived the Middle Passage, then they were brought to plantations. And again, those families were often broken apart. So they had to gather together to survive. They developed new structures, new families, new organizations that brought each other in. They looked after each other as family. These same types of generosities to help each other survive began the founding of the Black church. Other voluntary organizations, fraternal orders, free African societies, and schools started as history continued. After the Civil War and after emancipation, there's literally an explosion of voluntary organizations, such as orphanages, old folks' homes, schools, mutual aid groups, where people pooled resources and worked together on issues of actual survival in the face of Jim Crow. Next, we move on to the 20th century. The civil rights movement is a philanthropic movement. It was not only steeped in the church and in fraternal organizations, but people volunteered to drive each other. They let people stay in their homes. They supported each other during boycotts. They looked after marchers. They fed each other. And as time has moved forward, when we've talked today, philanthropy is those informal family ways of giving, communal ways of sharing that are part of daily life. The movement for Black Lives Matter and social change is a philanthropic movement. We are giving to support the greater community. All of these were a part of the extension of this great history of engagement. And again, goes back to the founding of this country and is still very much alive and well today. So let's talk a moment about the African-American church. The African-American church is the bedrock institution in the philanthropic landscape in the African-American community. Philanthropic values are taught and practiced on a regular basis. The African-American church strives to respond to the needs of the community. People pay tithes and offerings and are a part of the programming. That money, energy, and talent is frequently redistributed in the community. Churches support education, like what Martinez was speaking of. They support rent, programming for youth, soup kitchens, and other types of initiatives. And now let's talk a little bit about COVID-19 and philanthropy. COVID-19 has exacerbated poverty in the Black community, and it's been especially hard hit. Black unemployment rates have exceeded 20% of the community. 40% of Black businesses have shut their doors in the past 4 months. Economic disparities are causing poverty, anger, depression, and frustration. Now, more than ever, the better angels among us need to stand up and stand in the gap and step up their philanthropic gifts. As Angela said, African-American philanthropy accounts for an increasing amount of the charitable giving in America each year. African-American families give a greater percentage of their wealth than any other racial group in this country. And so if you were to ask, how can you engage with African-American philanthropists. The first thing is to broaden your understanding of what philanthropy is and to be more aware. Approach donors from their own lens and their own perspective on their own terms. Even if you may not see it because you're not familiar with it, it's been there and it's happening. We give a lot every day. Follow up, pick up the phone and connect and say, what's been your experience with our organization? How can we build relationships with you? How can we reflect back to you the nature of the relationship you'd like to have with us? And what are those issues and topics that would draw you in and that you're interested in collaborating to solve? Ask us. We want to be a part. We give, and each one of us can share a time or a story about how we, ourselves, our family have been impacted by the generosity of others who look exactly like us. So Angela, I hope that answered the question, just giving a little bit of the history of philanthropy in the African-American community. So thank you for letting me be able to share that information.
Thank you very much, Laura. And I see a comment in our chat box thanking you all for the introductions and for sharing history with more dimension than typically. Completely is a blessing for me today. Thank you very much for that. Jillian, I believe, I'm sorry, I'm looking. Yes, that was very good. In other words, we get to know us.
Right.
Why don't we give to your organization? The number one reason, you didn't ask.
Mm-hmm. Right. May I offer one more thing?
Sure.
All of our colleagues who are listening, put down your pencils, your paper, just sit back and listen. Be present in this discussion with us. You will gain so much knowledge if you just invite us in. So I hope everyone just listens today. Go back and listen to the recording later for any points you want to jot down. But thank you for allowing us and allowing me to be here.
Thank you. Bob, I think Laura set the table and gave us a great segue to the foundation of giving in the Black community. And we should not be excluded, but we should be embraced. And a report from Boston College's Center on Philanthropy and Wealth, it's estimated that a total amount of wealth to be transferred from African-American households via estates between 2001 and 2055 will range between $1.1 trillion and $3.4 trillion. And of course, we all have talked about and know about the transfer of wealth. And if you don't, please do some research on that. I know our nonprofit friends and our wealth advisors and those who are interested in this field know a great deal about transfer of wealth. And even if you don't, just think about how that will affect our communities. Bob, what do we know about the state of African Americans and the trends that we're seeing as Laura was talking about? Can you give us a little more information about what you're studying and what some of your friends are talking about and what we're seeing with African Americans in regards to that wealth transfer, putting on your wealth hat here?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm unmuted. I look at the wealth gap a lot, both from some research as well as just my own observations. I oftentimes refer to myself more as a practitioner, certainly more so than an academic. And I thought about this and made a few notes even before you posed your question. So my answer is somewhat in the context of the question. Planned charitable giving. It's at the top of the wealth management pyramid. Those words, planned charitable giving, are loaded with provocative implications. Planned giving implies that a donor is executing his or her charitable disbursements within a broader context of a financial or even an estate plan. These donors' charity is almost assuredly sourced from funds that are in excess of what the donor needs for their everyday household expenses. And in many cases, these planned gifts are either in excess of or contextualized within a sophisticated estate plan that passes the donor's wealth on to successive generations, while incorporating charitable provisions that might create tax advantages along the way. Indeed, charitable giving is more granular in terms of sharing one's excess wealth to support altruistic purposes. So we cannot have a real conversation about philanthropy in the African-American community without at least alluding to the wealth status of African-Americans, especially in comparison to whites in the United States of America. In their McKinsey & Company report entitled The Economic Impact of Closing the Racial Wealth Gap, Jason Wright and Shelley Stewart point out that the lack of wealth in the United States African-American community not only constrains their household financial capacity, it actually has a diminutive effect on the national gross domestic product. For those who don't know, the wealth gap when analyzed by race is staggering. According to the data that McKinsey gleaned from the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances in 2016, the median household net worth for Black Americans was $24,000 compared to $170,000 for the median household wealth of whites. While much more can be said about the racial wealth gap, just suffice it to say that for this gathering, that African-American households hardly have disposable wealth, which is normally considered the source of planned charitable giving. On the contrary, African-Americans' charity comes out of their hard-earned income, which means that their charity comes with a very high opportunity cost. That being said, African-Americans are generous philanthropists in their own right. Just as Laura has said, for one thing, African-Americans tend to have an expansive view of family, sharing their income and household resources with more than just their immediate family. And African-Americans have a history and tradition of tithing and consistently contributing a set part of their income to their church, which euphemistically is often considered part of their family. Building on the theme of community as family, African-Americans devote a large percentage of their time, talent, and treasure to charitable and community causes. This translates into hours devoted to causes and projects led by fraternities, sororities, civic organizations. Here in town, you could think about the 100 Black Men, Urban League, and NAACP. And that's not to mention the legions of African-American adult volunteers operating inside the expansive athlete development ecosystem. So I would say yes, philanthropy in the African-American community is different from the mainstream. Black philanthropy, for one, is contributed largely from earned income as opposed to being distributed from one's wealth in the form of dividends, portfolio appreciation, or estate plans. Two, African Americans are frequently engaged in their community, volunteering and working in their church, literally without a thought about capping or quantifying the value of their time. Thirdly, importantly, I believe that African Americans are subject to a knowledge gap when it comes to philanthropy. Just like many have said, we've been left out of the loop on how to invest in securities, just as many have also been out of the loop in terms of the understanding the purpose of foundations, especially community foundations. And we've also not learned how to use insurance products to leverage philanthropy. And there's been a dearth of estate planning, which means that planned charitable giving is an underutilized strategy, which should ideally be incorporated into the philanthropy framework for benefactors as well as beneficiaries within the African-American community. I thank you for letting me incorporate that wealth gap context with what we're discussing today. And as we go forward, I may have a little bit more to say, but I'll leave it at that for right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. And you hit on some very key points there. And for myself, with the work that I do at Madison Community Foundation as part of the donor engagement team and philanthropic advising, this year I have worked with more African-American donors than I have since I've been at the Community Foundation. And they are establishing donor advised funds, scholarships, and thinking and working with their families and thinking and paying it forward. And it has, and I must say, it has been extremely rewarding. And thinking about that on a personal note, my own giving with the fund that I established at Madison Community Foundation and using assets that I have for my estate plan, including my 401k and insurance policies. So that wealth is there, and sometimes it is never discussed. And for my colleagues out there, please have those conversations with your donors, and particularly your donors of color. Please do that. And don't forget, go ahead, Bob. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, as my one little follow-up comment, you just reminded me of a little dream I've always had and have never gotten it implemented. In teaching financial literacy, the #1 concept is compound interest. And when I do the examples, I just almost go mad with how powerful it can be. And over time, what wealth can be built up from very small amounts of money. And I always think about an great uncle that may have passed away and just left $50 for Bob, and it compounded for maybe 80 years or so, where that might be today. And so I have actually posited to several foundations that I would love to donate $1,000 and have it locked up and just invested at the regular market rate of returns for 100 years, and then craft some sort of purpose for the proceeds to be used for. But it just strikes me that, as I often say, mighty oaks grow from an acorn, that these little acorns of dollars that some of us poorer people have could really make a difference. And I just fervently do not want to see the next generation and the next century stuck as to where we are today. And so someone talked about us expanding our concept and understanding of philanthropy. I mean that I want to underscore that and suggest that with all our hearts, that we think very creatively, innovatively, and very long-term, because best case scenario, the world will exist 100 years from now. And what are we doing that can really make sure that the next 100 years are better than the previous?
Thank you very much, Bob. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, we're all about perpetuity at Madison Community Foundation. And I'm not going to do my whole pitch here, but thinking about that $1,000, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that is how a fund for women started, with 100 women giving $1,000 in 1993. And now we have an endowment that is housed at Madison Community Foundation over $3 million. So I'm gonna stop there. Okay, but I had to throw that in, you know.
Well, it's planting the seed.
Exactly, planting the seed. And hopefully others will think about that too with causes that they believe in. Martinez. Thinking about some of the information that Bob has shared and Laura has shared, can you add the importance of the role of financial advisors to understand the cultural norms in charitable giving in the Black community and how to navigate this and sharing those philanthropic tools to better help the African-American community organize donations and to maximize the tax-related benefits? How can professional advisory firms and advisors be more accessible to Black donors? And what would you say to those that are serious about working with the African-American community? How do they go about that?
I think that on a scale of importance, on a scale of significance, on a one, let's say it's a 1 to 10 scale, it's a 12. Because when we think about what it means to move from tolerance to celebration, that's the paradigm shift that we live in. We want to move from pulling people in our dream circle based on us tolerating them being there. We want to celebrate their existence and actually embellish their existence and let them know that they matter, that they're important to the bigger picture. All of our destinies are uniquely connected. And it's important for us to realize that as we do for others, we're doing for ourselves as an entity, as a country. So when we're talking about what it means to be connected to others and connected to that community and connected to the emerging community, it's all going to come down to safety. How do you create a safe space, a safe environment, a safe conversation around information that may be new to an emerging community? You have to lead, as author Og Mandino talks about, and Napoleon Hill talks about in his book, Think and Grow Rich, and Og wrote the book, The Greatest Salesman in the World, which was gifted to me by an elder of mine. We have to connect with compassion. We have to be able to translate our level of love to the person across the table. I've been working in finance. I've been working as a wealth coach for the last 7 years. I've been in different organizations. I started out as a banker. Now I work for myself as my own author, a keynote speaker, things of the sort. It's all about connecting with the person on the other side of the table. When I lived in Kenya, when I lived in Africa, and I volunteered for Alicia Keys' HIV hospital for 6 months, that's when I learned in an indigenous community, in an emerging community, how important it is for us to connect with language, with food, with culture, with understanding, and to have educational empathy. When I sit down with my clients that are first generation wealthy, and I'm explaining to them compound interest, I'm using terms and language that is relevant to their side of the table. So when we're speaking and we're welcoming people into our dream circle, this heroic state of belief is a dream circle, which I write about in my book, Think Like a DJ, is 7 steps to spin poverty into prosperity. If we're going to go from a mindset of lack to a mindset of abundance and overflow, we have to position our mentality in the space of compassion. How do you lead with empathy? You have to get across to the other side of the table. Lead with inquisition. Instead of demonstrative statements, lead with interrogative ones. Instead of imperative statements, lead with questions. Ask, what is it and how can we be more effective for you? So that's so important to me, the ability to celebrate the person on the other side of the table who may be completely different from you, celebrate that diversity. Just as we diversify our portfolio, we should diversify our language and our lives so that we can really maximize our returns from across the table, across the aisle. So that for me, that's what's important to me. It's important for us to have that voice, have that vision, and have that inclusive excellence. If I'm not in the room, how can I verbalize and speak up against something that may not be true to me and authentic to me? How can I have, participate in building a new vision? Like Bob mentioned, he wants to impact the next 100 years. We know what Black folks have experienced in this country over the last 400 years. What do the next 400 look like? And how do we collaborate to craft and build that vision, build that dream vision so that we can walk into it and that vision board can manifest its own destiny and we can get from where we are to our ultimate destination. And we know the root word of destination is destiny. So we're all on this fantastic voyage. Are we hearing all of the voices in the room as we're playing our music and we're rotating on this turntable of success and we're behind the DJ booth of life? Our life is the party. We have to realize that we are the DJs of our own party. And what that means is we have to connect with others. We have to connect with our audience, build a dream circle, fill the dance floor, because we ultimately want to rock our party. We're only going to live once, and we don't want our one party to become a party of one. So it's all about connecting, celebration, and making sure that we lead with inquisition. We lead with a needs-based conversation. And I cannot tell you what your needs are. I need to ask you, what are your needs?
Well, all right then. Thank you very much.
Bob had turned me up. I'm sorry. Bob, good morning.
I see you are ready. You all are hyped up. Just a reminder to attendees that the links to resources are in the chat box. And David, get ready. After I ask Alex this next question, I see that we have questions in the chat box and in the Q&A box. So I will be turning to you after we ask Alex this question. Alex, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about corporate social responsibility, which is very important. For more than 50 years, CUNA Mutual Group's foundation has invested more than $30 million into the communities that you all live in and serve. In 2019, the CUNA Mutual Group Foundation donated $3.8 million to support 62 community partners and organizations. Alex, CUNA Mutual Group has centered equity in your foundation and your community giving. How has 2020 accelerated your giving strategy, which we know, which you have shared with us, and I say we know because I know because we've talked about it, centering Blackness. So share a little bit with our attendees about the thoughts that you and your team and your entire company, has that, I know it was a long-term plans, but because of where we are in society, it has really accelerated. We want to hear more about that and centering Blackness, because we may have some on the call that may not be familiar with that term.
First of all, thanks for the question. I appreciate the historical acknowledgement of CUNA Mutual Group and its foundation. So when we think about the history and the longevity of this company, we have a very rich 85 plus year history of helping people achieve financial security. We believe that a brighter financial future should be accessible to everyone. For us, our values are rooted in doing the right thing, number one. Number two, making a difference in society. Number three, looking for better ways to meet the needs of everyone. And number four, to be inclusive. You heard Bob speak to the history and the tradition. We heard Laura mention the importance of values, and you heard Martinez talk about the connections to our community. So when I go back and I share with people the journey that we have been on, it began towards the end of 2018 and throughout 2019. CUNA Mutual Group Foundation centered equity as a part of its philanthropic strategy. And it determined that the areas of greatest need were in addressing the racial and socioeconomic disparities that exist in our communities. We know that we can help even more people through intentional community outreach, which is why we decided to focus on 3 areas. I like to call them E to the third power: education, economic stability, and emergency aid. With that being said, 2020 definitely accelerated and propelled our giving strategy past the 3-year plan that we had put in place. One of the things that we have done is we have continued to make positive changes in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and also as it played out and as it's continuing to play out with the civil rights movement of 2020. We heard Laura also share that the civil rights movement back in the 1960s, but then also in 2020, let me tell you people, that is a philanthropic movement. I am proud that we are part of that movement because we understand that the work that we've been doing to address the inequities in our communities requires further effort. And we know we can, we will, and let me tell you, we plan to do more. A few examples of what we have done this past year are the following. So, reducing the burden on our grantees, first and foremost. Number two, we accelerated the pace and the volume of our giving. We also asked our community partners whether or not it was in their best interest to also receive the funding, right? Instead of that mentality of, oh, well, we'll just pay you and we will provide the support that we have pre-allocated, especially if they were in a multi-year grant, it was us stepping back and saying, again, with a relationship and mutual respect, how can we best support you? Let me ask the question, would it be beneficial for us to send your Q4 payment in Q2 payment? Does that impact your budget? Does that impact your funding? And so we had some organizations that had responded and said, yes, please. And thank you for asking us that question. We also had other organizations say, thank you for acknowledging that we may be on a different fiscal year cycle and that would impact us. So again, it goes back to what you've heard my fellow panelists say and share, ask and listen, and then do what they have told you to do. So reducing the burden on the grantees, accelerating the pace and volume of giving for those who had requested it, increasing the amount and frequency of our check-ins with our community partners, investing more at the local and at the neighborhood level. Again, they are on the ground doing the work. Trust in what they are sharing and partnering with other philanthropic entities so that we could go further together and more strategically and talking to my fellow partners. I love that I can reach out to you and to Tom at MCF and ask, what are you investing in? Or have you heard about the work of this group, this organization? If not, let me introduce you. May I introduce you? We also publicized our commitment to social justice on our website. And one of the things I'm I am so excited about is that we looked at our investment policy and we updated it so that it now includes social impact investments, which better reflects the mission and the vision of the CUNA Mutual Group Foundation. I must also say that it has been very exciting to see our foundation board engage in some very real, very open, very raw conversations related to which organizations are on the ground doing the work, which ones are led by people of color, women-led organizations, Black-led organizations, Latinx-based and run organizations, asking us the question of who's on their board? Do we know who's also on their board? Do we know if a community member has a seat at the table? Are they able to provide the song to the DJ? I think that that is an extremely important piece that we have to talk about. When you ask me the question of how we are centering Blackness, it's being able to ask the question, and especially tying back into that inclusion piece of it, who is there? Whose voice is being amplified? And I think that that is extremely important when we talk about the way CUNA Mutual Group is now working on its transformational philanthropy.
Wow. Thank you very much. That was powerful. And again, as Laura said, listen, I hope everyone is listening and you can come back at a later time and listen, take your notes, but this is some very powerful gems that are being dropped today, this morning. I'm going to take a moment to go to David and see if we have questions from our audience that he can share with us, that questions that you all want to ask our panelists. David?
Yes, thank you, Angela. I will do this without video. It's not allowing me to turn it on. We have a couple of questions here. One from Bruce Matthews that describes a colleague of his, a chief development officer at a historically Black medical school, tell him that the African-American community considers estate planning to be a private family matter, and therefore they are very hesitant to discuss it with the nonprofit organization. On the other side of that, we have a question from Peter Covey, who shares that based on his experience, business development officers at nonprofits are very reluctant to discuss donors' assets, identify dollars that they will never use in their lifetime, and how to leverage those assets. So he's asking, how can development officers at nonprofits be more comfortable? So we kind of have both sides of this question, and it looks like it's directed at Bob.
Just taking off my mute there. I am actually an attorney by training, and my first years out of law school, I worked on wills and trusts. And interesting, I'm now hearkening back to why I do what I do, because when my dad passed away, I discovered that he was a prolific saver, and we had almost $100,000 in the bank, even though, you know, we grew up pretty much working class poor. And I was incredulous at what it could have been had it been invested. And I didn't even know anything about investing, but my mom would only respond to me as far as advice. I mean, she wasn't going anywhere other than her lawyer's son. And so I had to really bone up and read books. Literally, I remember the one from Merrill Lynch was called How to Buy Stocks. And so to the person's point, you know, I was kind of upset that my parents had been so private that I wasn't even able to maybe help them to do even better, although my dad had done very, very well. And so, oh my goodness. And then I work on land issues down south because people die intestate and they're leaving scores of acres without a will. And so the questioner points to a really dire problem as far as, I guess what I call it, the lack of sophistication in estate planning. And we can, between us, name more than 10 people who are very prominent and wealthy, Black entertainers who passed away without a will. And it's always, I don't know if it's shocking and sad or sad and shocking. So that's just an area where education is so important. And again, I don't even know if there's any substitute for that, because at a certain point, we all have to be responsible for ourselves and for our own households. And the only way we can do that, especially, you know, I teach capitalism as well. And people know that the first Latin concept that we learn in law school is caveat emptor, basically let the buyer beware. So we have to fend for ourselves. And you can't do that unless you have that right sort of education. So on the other side with the practitioners, I would just say, and I think Alex talked about, you know, this is a time where we have license to have the tough conversations. And I have another initiative that deals with athletes. And oftentimes they say that we're working with people who don't know what they don't know. And so we have to get into their framework of relationship and develop the comfort level and trust where we can help with those conversations that need to be had. I often say that we're living all in the United States of America, but with various alternative universe experiences. And there's people who are walking around every day that really could use the help and advice of the expertise that the philanthropic community has to bring. And the more I'm thinking about it as I'm saying this, forums like this and going beyond forums like this are absolutely important.
And I want to add on to that, Bob. I think it's really key. I think it's significant, and I think it's key to lead with relevant and interesting information when you're working with our community. I think it's important for us to realize that the framework that we're working within, we're almost working against 400 years of this inertia and this systemic holdback. And we're working against, Black folks including themselves in Americanism and being taken advantage of when you look at the Tuskegee Airmen experiment. And when you look at how welcoming our people have been and what that has manifested in our culture, we're fighting against this level of distrust. So there won't be an automatic turnkey solution. How could there be? There won't be. We have to lead in a culturally relevant way, and finance has its own language. So we have to be able to not necessarily just meet people where they are, but show them where they can be, paint the picture, ask, make it plain for folks, get vulnerable with people, ask them, do you want your child and your, in the event that you're not here, do you want them to be able to continue to have an education? Do you want your wife or your husband, do you want them to continue to be the person that tucks your children in at night, instead of someone else? Do you want to be able to get rid of all your debts? Do you want to leave a legacy package to the person that's going to be most affected by you not being here? Those type of questions are relevant, interesting, and they actually express vulnerability from your side of the table just by asking the open-ended question. So that there is, rightfully so, there is inertia. Rightfully so, there is stagnation for good reason. But on the other side of that coin, without us moving past this, what will our lives and the legacies continue to be if we don't answer the questions and make the choices while we have the agency? When you pass and you transition, when my dad passed when I was 4 years old, he wasn't able to answer the questions anymore. So, lead with those questions that can connect with people on a humanistic dimension and not a financial or capitalistic dimension. Connect with the human and let it be known that you're painting a picture of legacy and impact for generations to come. And I think that helps people, that helps the guard come down, not just in our community, but in all communities. It's a very private conversation to talk to mom about her not being here when, she's got 3 or 4 children, or dad not being here when he's got grandchildren, his son has a son. That's a very intimate conversation. So it's important for us to understand why that is the case, not necessarily expect there to be a turnkey solution. And when we are having those questions, lead with authenticity and vulnerability. Share your story, build enough common ground that you both can walk across the stage on.
Thank you so much. And Laura, as development professionals, we have heard many, many stories and thoughts about talking about estate planning. One that I hear often is, if I talk about it, it's going to happen. So I don't want to talk about death. That terrifies me. And some of the experiences that you have had in the nonprofit realm in regards to estate planning and legacy. And I love the HBCU tie-in too, so I'm gonna pass it to you.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, Laura.
I think part of what Martinez was saying and what Bob said is so true. In our community, we don't trust. So it's that connecting with us and developing a personal relationship, showing me that you understand and want to support me, and then finding some successes that we can share together. So when you talk about financial planning, it's, first of all, as Bob said, how much can I actually afford to start this with? Now, again, we talk and we think in our mind, you're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars, thousands. You don't have to start there. And so you have to be able to provide safe ways for people to just start and to begin to have some success. And then you have them invite their friends and then they start to have success, and then it grows. And you have to be willing to spend the time with us and give us a chance. It's not going to happen quickly, but we learn from each other. That's how we trust and we learn. I moved here. The first question people ask me is, who's your church family? I was here 3 days. I didn't even have a church family, but I found a church family. Then somebody told me, do you know where to go to get something to eat? Do you know where to go to get hair products? Do you know where to go to get this, that, and the other? This is how we share information. If you watch those movies talking about Green Book and all of that, they told you where to go, where to eat, where to stay, which was safe. And so you want to help me manage my funds, to grow my money, I have to know that it's safe. I trust Angela. I will go to Angela. I trust Martinez because they've connected with me and they've shown me that they were safe. So safety is so important. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a great question. Thank you very much to Bruce for asking, and thanks, David, for sharing that question. We are at 9:40. I want to, wow, time is moving quickly here. I definitely want to go back to Martinez about financial advisors and understanding the cultural norms in charitable giving. However, according to the Center for Financial Planning Board, the CFP, in 2019, less than 3.5% of all of the 80,000 certified financial planners in the United States were African-American or Latinx. You have touched on some of the concerns, needs, and opportunities in working with philanthropy and wealth management with Black clients. Why is it important to why is it important to have that representation of Black advisors on staff or reaching out, or how can advisors that we have now on the attendees that are listening now or may listen later, how can they bridge that gap? Or what are some of the tools, or how are you connecting with your fellow advisors?
Well, I think the first key is that Bob chiming in. Did you want to add something, Bob? No. Okay. So I think that the first key to recognize is that the field force is not as diverse as the real force. The field force, us as advisors, we need to be as equally diverse and malleable and flexible as the folks we serve. So for there to be less than 1% in this state alone, less than 1% of advisors to be advisors of color, that is a challenge. If I cannot see success, how can I be successful? I have to see success to be success. So that's just like a woman may prefer to have a woman doctor. An older guy and a seasoned gentleman may want to work with someone of his generations who understands Clint Eastwood and John Wayne. I may not connect with that. So how is it that we build that connection? We have to put the folks out there who are opinion leaders in that space so that they can be culturally relevant and interesting to the folks that are sitting in front of them for a greater purpose and a greater good. So when I met Bob, 10, 15 years ago, and Bob, well, you wasn't nothing, but you was about 45 then, Bob. I know you only about 55 now, but you was about 45 when I met Bob. And I saw Bob, I said, that could be me. When Bob came to my neighborhood and he showed up on 36 and Brown, and he came to the community center and told me an asset versus a liability. All I knew about liabilities was I heard liability car insurance. That's all I knew. And an asset I had never heard before. But when he told me that an asset is what you own and a liability is what you owe, and he shows me a compounded interest graph, and I'm like, wow, that $50 over time did perform at 7, 8, 9, 10%. How did that happen? I could see myself mirroring his legacy. Bob took me to New York. The first time I ever seen 1,000 or 2,000 wealthy Black folks hanging out at a celebration. It blew my mind. Bob took me to his sister's home and connected me with his family and showed me what it meant to emerge from the underbelly of America and to come from 39th and Lloyd in Wisconsin and Milwaukee and 15th and Keith and Milwaukee Public Schools. So when we're trying to diversify our impact, we have to diversify our field force with folks that are going to be, number one, authentic, and number two, that are going to be vulnerable, that are going to be able to say, I may not know it all, but here is what I do know. And, you know, people that are comfortable with painting a picture. Some folks of us in the world are stick people, and some of us are carrot folks. Some folks need, you know, discipline, and some folks need aspiration. So when you're talking to Black people, if you paint the picture and you let them know that this is going to create $1 million, this life insurance plan, this term life insurance plan for $15 or $20 a month, or we can go into the permanent space where you can actually borrow against the growth and the wealth accumulated in the policy. When we paint that picture, people are like, wow, that is something I did not know that existed. I put all my money under the mattress, or it's in a 0.01 interest savings account. It's not even beating inflation. So when we start to illustrate and paint the picture for others, it has to be, if we're not of that community, we have to use language that's vulnerable, that's connective, and that's authentic. And, you know, for us to really get out there and really have the impact and really touch lives, we have to diversify our field force as much as we diversify our own portfolio, so that we can have a maximization of returns for ourselves and others.
Thank you, Martinez. Bob, and then Alex. And Bob, share a little bit about the mentorship, the importance of that. And then Alex, you're next.
Sure. And Martinez, thank you very much for those accolades, but it really is an example of why I do what I do. Like I said, working in state government, I just began to see that the problem was very, very deep, and that it's really going to require, I mean, if we really are talking about fixing things, we've got to groom the next generation to be ready for the opportunities and the knowledge that it takes to be an advisor and to actually qualify for some of these opportunities. We have people who qualify today, but as the percentages show, we've got to get many, many more qualified. I had a conversation with Camille Carter not too long ago, and I'm always talking about the future and mentoring, et cetera. And she said, Bob, I want to fix the present. And that startled me. I'd never heard that term before like that. And it's sad and frustrating because I honestly don't know what to do about the present, but I have absolute clarity about what to do about the future. And that's where this mentoring comes in. There's so many things that I want to say. I can't say them all, but we talk about change, we talk about systems, and I just got on a track for about actually 12 months ago for a collective impact initiative. And CUNA Mutual is going to hear a little bit more about this in the future. But basically, I'm rejuvenating a project that we started some time ago called CLIMB, Communities Learning to Invest and Mobilize for Business. And it's going to have 3 tiers to it, and it's going to be sort of a systemic framework where we're going to work inter-organizationally with a number of other financial education entities to be sure that more youth of color especially get early exposure to financial literacy all the way up to investing. We did a pilot this past summer in Milwaukee that we're going to build upon as we go forward. And then we're going to create some experiences with investing. All of this is really about money and wealth. And so you can't not know how to invest if you're going to be in this space. And so we want to work on that. We actually had some talks with the UW Business School. And one of the things that inspired me to do a program we're going to roll out called the AIM Asset Management Experience. We're going to have small, teeny tiny portfolios for our high school students to manage. And they'll be overseen by professionals, and just give them that real life experience. And then we'll move on into creating more investment clubs similar to ones that we've started in the past, but do it more systemically and in collaboration with the larger investment club organization, Better Investing. We actually are working on some national MOUs right now as we speak. And so, you know, we have a real opportunity to get it right in the future. And I think it starts with just really being sure. I always tell the kids when I'm in front of young kids and they start acting up, not paying attention to my instruction. And I'll say, you all are trying to send me to jail because, you know, we passed a law to leave no child behind. And I say, you got to just pay attention and be sure that I'm not leaving you behind. Otherwise, I'll go to jail. And basically, you know, what I'm trying to say is, you know, let's not leave these kids behind. And the system that we're piloting right now doesn't fully engage the school system so much as community-based organizations. Those are, you talk about trust and relationships. Those are the entities that have the relationships with our kids of color, more so sometimes than sort of the truncated relationships of school counselors or the structure in school that doesn't fit our kids. So we have a real opportunity. And then I look forward to working more with Martinez and Laura. I have to tell you the story of my first Millionaires Club cohort. One of the gentlemen went all around Robin Hood's barn, if you know what I mean. And fast forward after he's been released, he's called and we're having some conversations now. And, you know, we want to try to get him on track. And I'm hoping he can share his story. I love to hear, we all make mistakes. And so I'm always listening for whether they took responsibility or it was some external problem or not their fault. But man, when they take responsibility and learn from those experiences, you've got something very powerful there.
Yes, you do.
So I want to have another conversation because there are people who've learned a lot of lessons.
Yes.
And we want to figure out how to get them, because I'm going to be more of a facilitator, but it's going to be the Martinez's and others who can really relate to the individuals that we're trying to reach. And we want to empower them to be able to do this work that has to be done on what I call the front lines.
Thank you very much, Bob. Alex, I want to go to you and then I'm going to turn it to David. I see a couple more questions. So quickly, Alex, as you speak, and I also want to talk about, as Bob was talking, it reminded me of the credit union movement and the credit union movement and your employee resource groups. I want to make sure I get that in for sure.
Hopefully I can sum it all up. But, I mean, when we think about you know, I started chuckling when Bob had said, you know, there's a law, like no child left behind. He's exactly right. Part of what our responsibility is, and this goes back to the question that was asked in that space that Martinez and Laura talked about feeling safe and establishing trust. And it's also about respect, right? There's that other line as well, and that validation. You cannot, right, be in a position that we are in and not be looking to the side, backwards, and in front of you and not saying, I have a responsibility to bring my village with me. That is my community, right? So it is using your appendages accordingly and bringing people along. I often talk about oars. And I'm not talking about the ones that are in the canoe that you're rowing on Lake Mendota or Lake Monona. I'm talking about the opportunities, the access, and the resources that we need to ensure that our Black, Latinx, and other communities of color and marginalized groups are informed. My father always used to say, education is power. So if you learn about compounding, you have a responsibility to share that with your brother, with your sister, whomever that is, so that they too are learning the secrets to establishing generational wealth. That is our responsibility. It is providing them with the access to the information that you have, to the resources, right? These are their oars. When I think about the way we are connecting the dots at CUNA Mutual Group, I have to begin by first answering the question, where people say, Alex, I don't know what and who CUNA Mutual Group is. And why is there a CUNA on your campus as well? So I distinguish between the two and validate and go, you're right, it is a little confusing, right? So it's that validation of the question and taking time to further explain. CUNA stands for the Credit Union National Association. CUNA Mutual Group is a full-service insurance, investment, and financial services company that believes a brighter financial future is accessible to everyone. But we also acknowledge, and I say this very candidly, historically, it has not been accessible to everyone. So when we think about the work that our HR, our talent management, talent recruitment team has been doing in the space of looking at how do we bring young people in, right? Bob mentioned the community centers. We have some fantastic partnerships with the Lucier Community Center, with the Vericourt Neighborhood Center, with the East Madison Community Center, with our 4 adoptive school partners of bringing these young people in and showing them, first of all, welcome to our campus. We hope you take an opportunity to look around, look up, look to the side, that you meet some of the people so that you can start seeing some of the people. You connect the dots. This is why math is so important. This is why science is so important. Taking time to give them that access to our building. When I think about the work that one of my colleagues is doing in this space of traveling to HBCUs and saying, hey, we're a great company. We're headquartered up in Madison. Yeah, it's a little cold, 8 to 9 months out of the year, and it snows a lot. But we want you here. And let me explain why we want you here. And let me talk to you about our ERGs. Well, I got to tell you, I'm a member of several ERGs, one of them the African-American ERGs. And I have to tell you, they never cease to amaze me. When we think about why our ERGs were established, and that means Engagement Resource Group, I think about the fact that they were established to provide our workforce with similar backgrounds, lifestyles, and passions with the opportunity to connect, right, in a safe and in a trusted space. They are employee-led groups that are promoting that personal and professional development of a very diverse and inclusive mindset. So when we think about the power of our African-American ERG to support our business goals and then also to help to drive our company forward, they're also creating opportunities for our other colleagues to be learning about who we are in this shared community, in this shared humanity, and providing opportunities for them as well. And I think that when we think about the role that ERGs play in our company, it's one where, again, going back to that access, it's being able to say, hey, you know what, Alex, we have a question about this organization. Can you share? But they're also ones where they'll say, hey, Alex, have you checked out this organization? They are on the ground. Do you know about them? Cool, if you do. If not, I say, give me the name. Give me the point of contact. We need to know who they are.
Wow, this has been pretty awesome. And I know we have other questions and we didn't get to all the questions that I had, but this has been amazing. I'm going to pass it over to David, and I can never, ever thank you all enough for sharing your knowledge with us this morning.
Thank you, Angela, for leading this vital discussion. Thank you, panelists, Alex, Laura, Martinez, and Bob, for sharing your expertise and your passion, and for the opportunity to learn from and with you as we work toward a better, more equitable present. Thanks to all who tuned in this morning and for the work that you and your colleagues advance for our community. We need you now more than ever. As you heard, a recording of this session will be available on the Madison Community Foundation and WACGP website. Please hold December 8th for our last program of the year, Working with Women on Estate and Charitable Gift Planning. Stay tuned for more meaningful programs announced for 2021. If you're interested in learning more about WACGP or becoming a member, please visit our website, wisconsinplannedgiving.org. I don't know why we didn't choose that as our name, but Thank you again, everybody. Stay inspired.